Okay, today we're looking at how and why recruitment and training of soldiers changed in this period of warfare between 1500 and 1700. As you can see, the significant change in recruitment that took place during these years was a shift towards permanent, professional and better trained armies. But you need to appreciate that that shift did not take place until later in this period, until the 1640s and the English Civil War. So for the earlier part of the period, between 1500 and the 1640s, the recruitment and training of troops remained practically the same as it had been during the Middle Ages. So there is some continuity here. You will still see commissioners of array being sent into counties to assist in the muster of local civilians for the armies. So in other words, the recruits were not professional soldiers. Sometimes there would be local militias, they were known as trained bands, and they were increasingly important in counties as part of local defence. And they'd be made up of small groups of men who would purchase their own weapons and train together for the purpose of just providing security for that local region. But these were not a national army, and indeed, frequently they would refuse to fight outside their local areas. So as we've said, it is the English Civil War between 1642 really and 1651, which is the big catalyst for change during this period as far as recruitment and training is concerned. You will have studied this possibly in Year 8, Lower 4th, and you can find out more information about the Civil War and what it was all about really on Firefly. This obviously is the contest between the supporters of Parliament, who were known as the Roundheads, and the supporters of Charles I, the King, who were known as the Cavaliers. So when the English Civil War broke out in 1642, both sides tried desperately to enlist men and increase the size of their armies. At first they used traditional methods, so the King would send commissioners of array, Parliament would send officials, both would try to appeal to the support of local militias. But these local men were often reluctant to fight. It would have meant that they would have to move out of the region that they were formed to protect. And all in all, they failed to provide sufficient numbers of recruits for both armies. And therefore, both sides resorted to conscription. In other words, compelling men to fight in the areas that they controlled. Parliament introduced conscription in 1643, the Royalists in 1644, and this did lead to an increase in troops, but unfortunately those troops tended to be poorly trained, and some of these men would desert as well, so desertion was a big problem. In fact, it was not uncommon for about a third of infantry units, for example, to desert their positions. You'll also see in this period that both sides produced propaganda pamphlets to try and encourage men to volunteer, which is obviously something perhaps you know of in the 20th century in the First World War, but it can be seen here in the 1640s. This was helped, of course, by the relatively recent development of the printing press. So these pamphlets were mass-produced, and of course would tell exaggerated stories of atrocities committed by the other side. But the real big significant change here happens in 1645, when Parliament decides to reorganise its army to get more soldiers and also better trained soldiers. And this is the creation of the new model army. And the new model army, led by people such as Oliver Cromwell, was a significant shift as far as recruitment and training was concerned, because it is a shift towards a professional, national, permanent, standing army. In other words, an army that will continue to exist even in peacetime. And this is new in warfare in Britain. So let's quickly run through what was new about the new model army then. Firstly, it removed incompetent military leaders, those who had gained their commands solely because of their social status. And they were replaced by men with military experience such as Thomas Fairfax and Oliver Cromwell. So this is quite a change because, as you know from the warfare, the recruitment during the Middle Ages, commanders tended to be from the social elite, earls and lords and dukes. As well as that, also, training was improved too. The training was important because the troops needed to have discipline, rules, and training was enforced more strictly. And there are various reasons for this that we will look into a little bit later. Troops were paid a decent wage as well, a reasonable wage, about 8 pence a day, which did encourage them to be more professional and more disciplined. Sometimes they would be paid in arrears, in other words, at a later time, so they would do their job knowing that they weren't going to be paid just yet. And this was a national army that was formed here. We're talking about the separate local parliamentary armies being merged together to create a national army of about 22,000 men in total. All infantry were issued with a basic standard uniform for the first time, which will be a russet or orangey red coat. And again, as we've said, this was intended to be a more permanent army and would continue to exist even after the civil wars had ended. Now, the new model army contributed significantly to Parliament's victory in the English civil wars. Although the new King, Charles II, eventually in 1660 disbanded the new model army, the existence of a permanent army continued as he established a new, smaller standing army than the new model. And England has had a permanent standing army ever since, so this is a really significant change as far as warfare is concerned. We just want to spend a bit of time looking at Oliver Cromwell's role in this part 2. He's mentioned on the slide in front of you. And he is one of the individuals who contributed hugely to changes in recruitment at this time. So he's very important. And it just goes to show that now we're reaching a point where perhaps, once again, individuals can make a difference to warfare, can initiate and instigate changes. Cromwell was an MP, born in 1599, died in 1658. He was a skilled cavalryman as well as being an MP. And he played a vital role in the creation of the new model army and indeed became the leader of its cavalry, which you will see at the Battle of Naseby in 1645. And Cromwell insisted upon things we've talked about, such as the importance of drill training, strict discipline, and the idea that people should be promoted according to their merit, their commitment and skill, rather than their social status. The reason why discipline was also important in the new model army was because of the weaponry, because of muskets and the tactics. For example, tactics that deployed soldiers in square formations, flanked by pikemen, were only effective in battle if soldiers were really well trained and drilled and disciplined in manoeuvring around in these formations. So discipline and constant drill practice was crucial. And obviously this led to the idea of having a professional standing army who could do these things. So overall, significant changes in the recruitment and training of armies in the 1640s really came about as a result of developments in the science and technology of weapons. Training needed to be suited towards the use of these weapons, such as square formations and muskets. And as well as that, also down to the influence of maybe the government and individuals such as Oliver Cromwell and the new model. That would be your example that you would use there. So pretty significant change, recruitment and training during this period, but note, only really starting in the 1640s. Until then, we are seeing a high degree of continuity in recruitment and training in warfare.